He wouldn't stop barking, even when they told him to stand down. The sound cut through the terminal like something alive, sharp and urgent, echoing off glass walls and polished floors as travelers slowed, turned, then froze mid-step, their rolling suitcases falling silent behind them while Rex stood rigid beside a black hardshell suitcase near gate C12, his body low, ears pinned forward, tail still as stone, a quiet storm held tight beneath his fur. Ethan Cole felt it before he fully saw it. That subtle shift in the air, the kind that didn't belong in a place filled with coffee smells, flight announcements, and the steady rhythm of departure boards blinking overhead, because Rex wasn't barking out of excitement or routine detection. No, this was different, deeper, something threaded with a tension that didn't belong to explosives or contraband, but to something unseen, something felt. Stand down, Rex, Ethan said low, not as a command but as a question, his voice steady, measured, shaped by years of discipline and a past that had taught him the cost of ignoring instinct. Yet the dog didn't break, didn't even flick an ear toward him, instead stepping closer to the suitcase, nose hovering inches from its surface, inhaling slowly, deliberately, as if reading something written in scent alone, while the overhead speaker announced a delayed flight to Denver, and a child somewhere nearby laughed. The normalcy clashing violently with the silent alarm building in the space between man and dog. A TSA agent approached, casual at first, hand resting lightly on his belt, eyes scanning the unattended luggage with practiced indifference. Probably just a forgotten bag, he muttered, more to the growing crowd than to Ethan, but Rex responded with a low, vibrating growl that seemed to rise from somewhere deeper than muscle, something instinctive, something that made even the agent pause mid-step. Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing, watching the way Rex shifted his weight, not forward, not aggressive, but grounded, anchored, like he was holding position over something fragile rather than dangerous. And that's when Ethan felt it, that quiet pull of memory, a flicker of a moment. Years ago, when a signal had been missed, when hesitation had cost more than anyone could afford, the echo of it tightening his chest just enough to remind him that some warnings didn't come twice. Around them, the terminal continued its dance of movement and noise, but closer in, a circle of stillness formed, passengers watching, whispering, phones subtly raised, curiosity blending with unease as Rex's bark broke again. Louder now, sharper, cutting through the air with a clarity that demanded attention, demanded action. Ethan stepped forward, boots firm against the tile, eyes locked on the suitcase, then down to Rex, whose breathing had slowed, whose posture had shifted yet again, no longer barking wildly but standing still, head tilted slightly, as if listening, truly listening, to something no one else could hear. And in that silence between sounds, between breaths, Ethan knew this wasn't routine, wasn't protocol, wasn't something that could be dismissed with a shrug or a standard clearance, because Rex wasn't asking to be heard. He was refusing to be ignored. And somewhere beneath the layers of fabric and plastic and steel in that ordinary black suitcase, something waited, quiet, unseen, but undeniably real. Ethan did not raise his voice, but something in the way he stepped forward made the noise around them fade, like the terminal itself was holding its breath as he lifted one hand slightly, palm outward, a quiet signal for space, while his other hand rested near Rex's harness, not pulling, not restraining, just grounding himself in the presence of the one partner he trusted without question. "I need this area cleared," he said calmly, eyes still fixed on the suitcase, his tone steady enough to carry authority without force. But the TSA agent hesitated, glancing at the unattended bag, then back at the growing crowd, uncertainty flickering across his face as if weighing protocol against instinct. "Sir, there is no alert on record," the agent replied, voice polite but firm. "We cannot shut down a terminal because of a reaction without confirmation." And for a brief moment, Ethan felt the weight of that statement press against him, the expectation to follow procedure, to wait, to trust the system that was built to catch what humans might miss. Yet beside him, Rex shifted again, not louder this time, not more aggressive, but quieter, more focused, lowering himself slowly until his chest hovered just above the polished floor, his nose nearly touching the side of the suitcase as his breathing changed, deep and controlled, as if drawing something in that no one else could perceive. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly as he watched, because this was not how Rex behaved for explosives, not how he reacted to narcotics. This was something else entirely, something that carried a different kind of urgency, one that did not shout danger but whispered it, persistent and unyielding. A woman in a business suit stepped closer, her heels clicking sharply against the tile before she stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, irritation clear in her posture. "Is this going to delay boarding?" She asked no one in particular, her voice cutting through the tension, with the impatience of someone used to moving forward, not waiting. And behind her, a man adjusted his watch. Another checked his phone, the subtle ripple of inconvenience spreading outward, pushing against Ethan like a tide he could not ignore. Yet he did not move, did not step back, because in that moment, he was no longer standing in an airport terminal. He was standing in every place where hesitation had once mattered too much, where seconds had carried consequences, where the smallest signal had been the difference between knowing and not knowing. "Rex," he said again, softer this time, almost a whisper, and the dog responded not with a bark, but with stillness, complete and unwavering, his ears angled forward, his body aligned with the suitcase as if shielding it, guarding it, not from threat, but for something inside. And that was the moment it shifted for Ethan, the moment when doubt gave way to certainty. Because Rex was not warning them away, he was holding them there. Ethan straightened slightly, turning his head just enough to meet the TSA agent's gaze. And there was something in his eyes now, something quiet but immovable. "I am not asking," he said, voice low, controlled, carrying the kind of weight that did not come from rank but from experience. "I am telling you, something is wrong." And for a second, no one spoke, no one moved, the air tightening around the words as if the truth of them had nowhere else to go. The agent hesitated again, then reached for his radio, fingers slower than before, uncertain but compelled, while behind them, the rolling announcements continued. Flights arriving, flights departing, life moving forward in steady rhythm. Unaware that in this small, suspended space near Gate C12, a decision was about to be made, one that would either pass unnoticed like so many others, or reveal something that had been hidden in plain sight all along, waiting for someone, or something, to refuse to walk away. The radio crackled softly in the agent's hand, a thin thread of static cutting through the thickening silence as he spoke in low, measured words that did not quite hide the uncertainty beneath them. Calling for a supervisor, requesting a secondary check, his voice careful, deliberate, as though choosing each word might somehow control what came next, and Ethan could feel the shift ripple outward, subtle but real, as the circle of onlookers widened just enough to create space, not out of obedience, but out of instinct, the kind that told people when something ordinary was no longer ordinary. Rex did not move, not even when a rolling suitcase bumped lightly against his flank from a passerby who had not yet noticed the tension in the air. His focus remained locked, unwavering, his nose hovering close to the seam of the black case, drawing in slow, steady breaths as if following a trail that existed only for him. And then, almost imperceptibly, his ears twitched, not forward this time, but slightly downward, angled toward the ground, toward the space beneath the shell of molded plastic and fabric, as though the signal he was reading had changed, had deepened, had become something quieter, more fragile. Ethan noticed it immediately, because he had learned to read Rex the way others read words, the way a medic reads a pulse. And this was not escalation, this was recognition. Something had been confirmed, not danger in the way people expected, but something that did not belong inside a forgotten suitcase left alone in a busy terminal. A supervisor arrived moments later, her steps quick but controlled, her expression composed in that practiced way of someone trained to manage uncertainty without feeding it. "What do we have?" she asked, her voice low, eyes moving from Ethan to Rex to the suitcase, taking in the scene with a single sweep. And the agent responded quietly, explaining the alert, the lack of prior flags, the unusual behavior, while Ethan remained still, letting the facts speak, but holding on to the one thing that mattered more than any checklist, the certainty that Rex would not be here, would not be doing this, if it meant nothing. The supervisor nodded once, then crouched slightly, careful not to cross the invisible line Rex had drawn around the case, her gaze narrowing as she studied it. The scuffed edges, the tagless handle, the absence of any identifying mark, details that, in another moment, might have been overlooked, but now seemed to gather weight simply because they were being seen. "We will proceed with caution," she said finally, rising again, her tone firm enough to carry decision, and with that, the space tightened once more, officers repositioning, a quiet perimeter forming, not dramatic, not rushed, just deliberate, controlled, as if the entire terminal had shifted into a slower, more careful rhythm. And then it happened, not loud, not obvious, but real. A sound so faint it could have been mistaken for the hum of distant machinery or the whisper of air moving through vents. Except Rex reacted instantly, his head tilting sharply, his body tensing not in alarm but in focus, a soft, almost questioning whine escaping him. The kind he never used for threats, the kind reserved for something alive, something that could respond, something that mattered. Ethan felt it like a pulse in his chest, that subtle confirmation that turned suspicion into certainty, because Rex was not warning them away, he was calling them closer, and in that single, fragile moment, the truth began to take shape, not as a fear, not as a threat, but as a possibility so unexpected it made the air feel heavier, as if the weight of what might be inside that silent, ordinary suitcase was finally beginning to press its way into the world, waiting to be heard by someone willing to listen. The faint sound lingered just beneath the noise of the terminal, fragile and uncertain, like something struggling to exist in a place it did not belong. And for a moment no one spoke because no one was entirely sure they had heard it at all, no one except Rex, whose entire body shifted in response, his posture tightening not with aggression but with urgency, his head lowering further until his nose pressed lightly against the side of the suitcase as if trying to reach through it, to reassure whatever was on the other side that it had been found. Ethan felt the change immediately, a quiet but undeniable transition from suspicion to something far more specific, and he stepped closer, his boots soft against the polished floor, lowering himself just enough to be level with Rex, his voice barely above a breath. "What is it, boy?" Not expecting an answer in words, but knowing he had already received one in the way Rex refused to step back. The supervisor noticed it too, that subtle shift in the dog's behavior, and her expression changed almost imperceptibly, the calm professionalism giving way to something more attentive, more cautious. "Did you hear that?" she asked quietly, not directed at anyone in particular, but the agent nodded, slower this time, uncertainty replaced with a growing awareness that this situation was no longer routine, that something inside that suitcase was not just an object, not just forgotten belongings waiting to be claimed. Another faint sound followed, slightly clearer now, not loud enough to draw attention from across the terminal, but unmistakable to those standing close, a soft, uneven noise that carried a rhythm, a pause, then another, and Rex responded with a low, gentle whine, completely different from the sharp bark that had first drawn attention. This was not a warning, this was recognition, and that difference settled heavily over everyone present. Ethan's chest tightened as understanding began to take shape, not fully formed yet, but enough to push him forward, enough to make him place a steady hand against the side of the suitcase, feeling the cool, hard surface beneath his palm, listening, waiting, and there it was again, faint but real, a small sound that did not belong in silence, that did not belong in luggage, that did not belong anywhere except where it could be seen and helped. "We need to open it," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady but carrying a weight that did not invite argument, and the supervisor hesitated only for a fraction of a second before nodding, the decision settling into place with a quiet finality. "Carefully," she replied, motioning for the agent to step forward, her eyes never leaving the suitcase as if afraid that looking away might somehow make the moment disappear. The agent knelt slowly, his movements deliberate, controlled, reaching for the zipper with a hand that no longer carried the ease of routine but the awareness of something unknown, something that required care, and around them the world continued to move, distant announcements echoing, footsteps passing, conversations resuming at the edges of the scene, unaware that within this small circle of stillness, something fragile waited on the other side of a thin barrier. Rex shifted slightly, but did not step back. His body angled protectively toward the suitcase, his breathing steady, his presence grounding the moment in a way no command ever could, and Ethan remained beside him, eyes fixed, heart steady, knowing that whatever they were about to find, it would not be what anyone expected, because Rex had not called them here for danger. He had called them here for something that needed to be found before it was too late, something that had been silent for too long, and now, finally, was being heard. The zipper moved slowly, inch by inch, the soft metallic sound stretching longer than it should have, as if time itself had decided to slow down and watch. The agent's fingers steady but careful, pulling just enough to create a narrow opening while everyone around him leaned in without realizing it, drawn closer by something they could not yet see but could already feel. Rex did not bark this time, did not growl. He simply stayed there, unmoving, his amber eyes fixed on the slight gap forming along the edge of the suitcase, his breathing calm but intent, like a guard who knew the moment of truth had already arrived. Ethan felt his own breath match that rhythm, slow and controlled, his hand still resting lightly against Rex's back, grounding both of them in the quiet tension that now filled the space. The zipper stopped halfway, and for a second, nothing happened. No sound, no movement, just a stillness so complete it seemed unnatural in a place built on motion. And then it came again, faint but unmistakable, a soft, uneven sound that slipped through the narrow opening like a fragile thread, and this time, no one questioned it, no one dismissed it, because now it was real, undeniably real. The agent froze, his hand hovering just above the zipper as his eyes lifted to meet the supervisor's. And in that silent exchange, a decision passed between them without words. Something deeper than protocol, something that said proceed, but carefully, because whatever was inside was not meant to be handled like ordinary luggage. Go slow. The supervisor whispered, her voice steady but softer now, shaped by the awareness that this moment carried more weight than any routine check. And the agent nodded, swallowing once before continuing, pulling the zipper open another inch, then another, the gap widening just enough for a breath of air to escape from within, carrying with it a faint warmth that did not belong to empty space. Rex shifted slightly, stepping closer but not crossing the line, his head lowering further as if trying to meet whatever was inside at its level, his ears angled forward, listening, waiting, and then the sound came again, clearer now, a small, fragile noise that held a rhythm of life, uneven but present. And Ethan felt something tighten in his chest as understanding finally settled into place, not as a shock, but as a quiet, undeniable truth. The agent paused again, this time not out of hesitation, but out of care, slowly placing his fingers along the edge of the opening and gently lifting the lid just enough to create a narrow view inside, his movements deliberate, controlled, as if afraid that anything sudden might disturb whatever fragile existence waited within. For a brief moment, his eyes searched, adjusting to the dim interior, and then they widened, not in fear, but in something deeper, something that carried a weight of realization that words could not immediately form. There is something inside, he said quietly, his voice almost reverent, as though speaking too loudly might break the moment, and Ethan leaned in just slightly, not rushing, not forcing, but allowing the truth to reveal itself at its own pace. While Rex let out a soft, almost relieved exhale, the kind that comes not from tension, but from knowing that what was hidden had finally been found, and in that small, suspended space between what they had expected and what was now unfolding, the ordinary had quietly given way to something far more profound, something that would not be forgotten once it was fully seen. The lid lifted just a little more, enough for light to slip inside, enough for the truth to begin revealing itself not all at once, but in fragments, in pieces that the mind struggled to assemble in real time, and the agent's breath caught softly in his throat as he leaned closer, his eyes adjusting, focusing, then holding, because what he saw did not match anything he had prepared for, not danger, not contraband, not anything that belonged to a checklist, but something smaller, something still, something alive. Ethan stepped forward then, slow and deliberate, his presence calm but urgent, his eyes following the agent's line of sight until he, too, saw it. A small figure curled tightly within the confines of the suitcase, wrapped in layers that had been arranged not with care, but with concealment, and for a moment, the world outside that narrow opening seemed to fall away entirely, replaced by a silence so deep it carried weight. Rex let out a soft, low sound, not quite a whine, not quite a sigh, but something in between, something that spoke of recognition, of confirmation, his body relaxing just slightly now that what he had sensed was no longer hidden, and Ethan felt that sound settle into him, grounding him, steadying the moment as he knelt beside the suitcase, lowering himself carefully, his movements slow so as not to startle what was inside. The supervisor moved closer as well, her composure intact but softened by the realization unfolding before her, her voice quieter now, shaped by something more human than protocol. "We need medical support, now," she said into her radio, her words clear but carrying an urgency that did not need volume to be understood. Inside the suitcase, the small figure shifted faintly, a subtle movement, barely there, but enough to confirm what they already knew, that this was not stillness, not absence, but life held too tightly in a space never meant to contain it. Ethan reached in slowly, his hands steady, careful, not rushing, not forcing, just offering presence, warmth, safety, the way he had been trained to do in moments where calm mattered more than speed. And Rex stayed close, his head lowered, his eyes never leaving the scene, as if standing watch over something sacred. The agent stepped back slightly, giving space now, his earlier hesitation replaced by a quiet understanding that this moment belonged to something greater than procedure, something that required care above all else. Another faint sound came from within, softer this time, weaker, but unmistakably real, and Ethan felt it in his chest more than he heard it, that fragile rhythm of breath, uneven but present, a reminder that time still mattered, that this moment, this exact moment, was the difference between being found and being lost. "You are okay," Ethan said quietly, not expecting the words to be understood, but knowing they needed to be said, his voice steady, calm, carrying a reassurance that filled the small space between his hands and the life he was reaching toward. Rex shifted closer, his body leaning slightly, not touching, but near enough to offer something unseen, something instinctive. And in that shared silence, between man, dog, and the fragile life hidden within an ordinary suitcase, the truth settled fully into place, not as shock, but as something deeper, something that would stay long after the moment passed, a quiet reminder that sometimes the smallest signal, the softest sound, is all it takes to change everything. The moment stretched gently, not rushed, not forced, as Ethan carefully lifted the small figure from within the suitcase, his hands steady and deliberate, supporting the fragile weight with a kind of instinct that came not just from training, but from something deeper, something human. And as he brought the child into the open air, a quiet shift passed through everyone watching, a collective stillness that replaced the earlier tension. Because now there was no more question, no more uncertainty, only the undeniable presence of a life that had been hidden and was now, finally, seen. The child's movement was slight, a faint stirring against the cool terminal air, and Ethan adjusted his grip instinctively, bringing the small body closer, shielding it from the surrounding noise and light, his voice low and calm. "You are safe now," spoken not for understanding, but for reassurance, for grounding. For the simple act of letting that truth exist in the space between them, Rex stepped closer. Then, careful, controlled, his usual alert posture softened into something gentler, his head lowering as if to meet the child at eye level, his breathing slow and even, and for a brief moment, he let out a quiet, almost soothing sound, the kind that carried no warning, no urgency, only presence, as if telling the small life before him that the search was over, that it had been found. The supervisor moved in closer, her radio still in hand, coordinating the arrival of medical support, her voice composed but touched with a softness that had not been there before, and the agent stood just behind her, his earlier hesitation replaced by a quiet awareness that he had just witnessed something far beyond routine, something that would not be filed away and forgotten. Around them, the terminal began to shift again, the distant hum of movement returning slowly, cautiously, as if the world was remembering how to continue. But those closest to the scene remained still, watching, not out of curiosity now, but out of something deeper, something that recognized the gravity of what had just happened without needing explanation. Ethan knelt down slowly, lowering himself to a more stable position as he held the child, keeping movements minimal, controlled, his focus entirely on maintaining calm, on keeping that fragile rhythm of breath steady. And Rex remained beside him, unmoving, a silent guardian whose job, for this moment, was no longer to detect or alert, but simply to stay, to be present, to hold the space with a quiet loyalty that required no command. A distant siren grew louder, faint at first, then clearer, approaching with the promise of help, of continuity, of what came next, and Ethan felt a subtle release in his chest, not relief exactly, but the easing of something that had been held tightly since Rex first refused to step away, because now the outcome had shifted, the unknown had become known, the hidden had been brought into light. Rex finally exhaled more fully, a slow, steady breath that seemed to carry the weight of the moment out with it, his body relaxing just enough to show that the urgency had passed, and Ethan glanced at him briefly, just a second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, no words needed, no praise spoken, just understanding, the kind that exists only between partners who trust each other completely. And as the sound of approaching footsteps and voices grew nearer, as the next phase of care moved into place, the moment settled into something quieter, something lasting. A reminder that in a place built for departures and arrivals, for schedules and systems, it had taken a single refusal, a single instinct followed without compromise, to reveal something that might have otherwise gone unseen, something that now, because of that quiet persistence, had been given a chance to continue. The paramedics arrived with a kind of quiet urgency that did not disturb the moment, but stepped into it, their movements practiced yet careful as they approached Ethan, one of them kneeling beside him while the other prepared a small medical kit, the soft rustle of fabric and the gentle click of latches breaking through the silence without overwhelming it. Ethan did not immediately let go, not out of hesitation, but out of instinct, ensuring that the transition from his arms to theirs would be as smooth and steady as possible, his voice low as he spoke, easy now, more to the child than to anyone else, his tone carrying the same calm that had guided every second since Rex first stopped. The paramedic nodded, understanding without needing explanation, sliding their hands into place with precision and care, supporting the small frame, checking for responsiveness with movements so subtle they almost went unnoticed, and when the child shifted slightly, a faint sign of awareness returning, a quiet breath passed through the group. Not relief, not yet, but something close, something that held on to hope without speaking it aloud. Rex remained where he was, just a few feet away, his posture relaxed but attentive, his eyes following every motion, not intervening, not alerting, simply observing as if confirming that the responsibility had been passed into capable hands. And Ethan glanced at him again, that same silent acknowledgement. Returning, a bond reinforced not through words, but through trust fulfilled. The supervisor stepped back slightly now, giving space to the medical team, her focus shifting from immediate response to coordination, her voice returning to a more structured tone as she spoke into her radio, quietly directing the next steps, ensuring that the situation would be handled beyond this moment, beyond the terminal, beyond the brief window in which everything had changed. Around them, the gathered passengers began to move again, slowly at first, cautiously, as if unsure whether it was appropriate to return to their routines, some lingering longer than others, watching with softened expressions, their earlier impatience replaced by a quiet understanding that they had witnessed something rare, something that did not belong to schedules or boarding calls. The sound of the stretcher being unfolded echoed softly against the floor, a gentle reminder that time was still moving forward, that this moment, while significant, was only one part of a larger story that would continue beyond these walls. And as the paramedics carefully placed the child onto it, securing the blanket with careful hands, Ethan stepped back just enough to allow it, his presence still close, still steady, but no longer the center of action. Rex finally shifted his weight, sitting down beside Ethan, his tail resting lightly against the polished floor, his breathing even, his gaze lifting briefly to meet Ethan's. And in that look, there was no need for praise, no need for reward, only a shared understanding that what needed to be done had been done. The stretcher began to move then, guided carefully toward the waiting exit, the paramedics maintaining that same calm rhythm, their focus unwavering as they carried the fragile life forward into the next stage of care. And Ethan watched for a moment, not following, not intervening, just ensuring with his eyes that everything remained as it should be. The terminal slowly reclaimed its normal sounds, announcements resuming their full volume, footsteps regaining their pace, conversations picking up where they had paused. But something lingered beneath it all, something quieter, something that did not disappear with movement, a sense that within the routine of arrivals and departures, something meaningful had taken place, something that reminded everyone present that even in the most ordinary spaces, the unexpected can reveal itself, and when it does, it only takes one moment of refusal, one decision to listen instead of ignore, to turn what could have been overlooked into something that continues, something that matters. The stretcher disappeared through the sliding doors, the faint echo of wheels rolling across the tiled floor fading into the distance until it was swallowed by the rhythm of the airport once more. And for a moment, Ethan remained exactly where he stood, his eyes fixed on the empty space where it had been, as if holding onto the last trace of something that had already moved beyond his reach, not out of reluctance, but out of quiet acknowledgement that his part in the story had ended the moment. The child was no longer in his arms. Beside him, Rex sat calmly, his posture relaxed now, the tension that had once defined every muscle gone, replaced by a steady stillness that carried no urgency, no alert, only presence, as if he, too, understood that the outcome had shifted, that what had been hidden was no longer lost. The supervisor approached slowly, her steps measured, her expression composed but softened in a way that suggested something deeper than routine had taken place. "You trusted him," she said, her voice low, not a question, not quite a statement, but something in between, and Ethan gave a small nod, his gaze dropping briefly to Rex before returning to her. "I always do," he replied simply, because there was nothing more to add, nothing that needed explanation, the truth of it already evident in what they had just witnessed. The agent stood a few feet away, his earlier certainty about protocol replaced by a quiet reflection, his eyes moving from the now empty suitcase to Rex, then to Ethan, as if trying to understand the moment not through procedure, but through something less defined, something that did not come from manuals or training guides, but from instinct, from trust, from the willingness to listen when logic had not yet caught up. Around them, the terminal had fully returned to life, the overhead announcements clear and steady, passengers moving with purpose once again, the hum of conversation rising back to its familiar level. But beneath it all, there lingered a subtle shift, something unspoken that remained in the air like a quiet echo, a reminder that not everything important announces itself loudly, that sometimes it begins with something small, something easy to dismiss. Ethan reached down then, his hand resting gently against Rex's neck, fingers brushing through the thick fur in a slow, deliberate motion, not as a reward, not as praise, but as recognition, a silent thank you that carried more weight than words ever could, and Rex leaned into it just slightly, his eyes closing for a brief second before opening again, steady and calm, as if to say the moment did not require celebration, only understanding. The black suitcase remained where it had been, now open, empty in a way that felt different than before, no longer a container of the unknown, but a reminder of what had almost gone unseen, and as a member of the security team moved in to handle it, to process it as evidence, as procedure required, it no longer held the same weight, because what mattered had already been taken from it, carried forward into a different path, one that would continue beyond this place. Ethan straightened slowly, adjusting his stance, the familiar posture of a man returning to duty settling back into place. But there was a quiet shift within him, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just a subtle reaffirmation of something he had always known, that sometimes the smallest signals carry the greatest truth, and that listening is not just about hearing, but about choosing to believe when it matters most. Rex stood as well, his movement smooth and unhurried, falling naturally into step beside Ethan as they turned away from the gate, blending back into the flow of the terminal without drawing attention, without needing acknowledgement, because the moment did not belong to recognition. It belonged to what had been preserved, what had been given a chance to continue. And as they walked, the noise of the airport rising around them once more, there was no need to look back, no need to confirm what had already been done, because some stories do not end in applause or closure. They end in something quieter, something steadier, the simple, unspoken understanding that when the moment came, they did not walk away, and because of that, something that could have been lost was found in time.